Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Foundations of American Democracy. This week, we'll be looking at American history, becoming a federal republic. I am Dr. Nicole Warmington Granston. So what we'll be covering is looking how the United States evolved from British colonies into an independent federal republic. We'll cover the causes of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitutional Convention, federalism, separation of powers, and the development of representative government. As such, we'll be reviewing events leading to the Declaration of Independence. We're going to look at understanding the Declaration of Independence, examine the creation of the Constitution, examine limited and representative government, and we're going to connect these historical events to modern American democracy. So, what were the seeds of American democracy? Now, several ideas and conditions helped to shape early American democracy. These include distance from English authority, representation, social mobility, covenants, which are agreements among settlers, individual rights, violent frontier conditions, and the social contract theory. What we find is that colonies developed traditions of self-government long before independence. So when you think about it, American democracy developed gradually from colonial experiences with self-rule and individual rights. But why did the colonists revolt? Now, over 100 years, England allowed the colonies to govern themselves through elected assemblies after the French and Indian War. Britain imposed taxes and stricter controls without colonial consent. Now, the major causes of this conflict were taxation without representation, British interference in colonial government, economic restrictions, and violations of traditional colonial rights. What you find was that the colonists were not initially demanding new rights. They wanted to preserve the rights they believed that they had already possessed. All in all, when you look at it, the American Revolution was fought to protect existing rights and self-government. Now let's discuss the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence was heavily influenced by philosopher John Locke and the social contract theory. Now, the social contract theory, as Locke argued, is that we are in a state of nature and people lack security. People then create governments to protect natural rights, and governments exist to protect life, liberty, and property. Now, with that, the core ideals of our Declaration of Independence were as follows. It kind of followed five major principles: that all people are equal, people possess natural rights. These rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments exist to protect rights, and government power comes from the consent of the governed. So as we see it, these ideals became the philosophical foundation of American government. Of course, within the Declaration of Independence themselves as well, we find that the United States had listed 27 complaints against the British government. The major issues included lack of representation, standing armies without civilian control, and the loss of independent courts. Now, once we established independence, you found that states created a weak central government under the Articles of Confederation. Some of the major problems under the Articles of Confederation were financial instability, commercial disputes, civil disorder, and weak national authority. You found that these weaknesses created pressure for a stronger government. With that, we had the Constitutional Convention being called. Now, the Constitutional Convention debated two major questions. That was, how powerful should the national government be, and how much power should states retain? Now, we find that during this big debate, 5 plans were put forward, but the debate centered on 2, the Virginia versus the New Jersey plan. Now, the Virginia plan really wanted to have representation based on population. It tended to favor large states, and they called for a bicameral legislature. The New Jersey plan, on the other hand, wanted to have equal representation for each state. They favored small states, and they called for a unicameral legislature. So the key conflict was that we found that large and small states disagreed about representation and political power. As a result, they established what we call the Great Compromise and other resolutions in this major debate. The Great Compromise actually created our bicameral Congress, where the House of Representatives would be based on population, while the Senate would provide equal representation for each state. Now, why does this matter? You find that this compromise helped to balance the interests of both the large and small states and remains central to Congress even today. Now, there's said to be a role that slavery played in our Constitution. You find that the Constitution avoided directly using the word slavery, but slavery influenced representation in Congress. And this came in the form of the 3/5 Compromise. It argued that 5 enslaved people counted for 3 free persons for representation and taxation purposes. So you find that this compromise revealed some very deep sectional tensions between the North and the South. Now, there also, after this major debate came the ratification debate. There are 2 major groups that debated the Constitution. You had the Federalists that supported a strong national government, believed it was necessary for stability and liberty. And then you had the anti-federalists that favored stronger state governments and feared centralized power. The ratification debate, therefore, has shaped the structure of American government and even has shaped our individual rights protections, even today. Now, another thing that came up is the idea of limited government. Right? The Constitution created a government with limited powers through horizontal powers in the form of separation of powers and checks and balances, and vertical powers in the form of federalism. Now we'll talk about the horizontal powers. First, let's talk about the separation of powers. Now, government authority was divided among the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. You find that each branch have separate responsibilities. Then, of course, we have the checks and balances. Now, checks and balances, you find that each branch can limit the power of the others to prevent tyranny. An example would find that the president can veto laws that come out of Congress. Congress can override vetoes, and the courts can declare laws unconstitutional. Now, we'll move on to discussing vertical powers. Now, under vertical powers we mentioned, this is where federalism falls. And federalism actually divides power between national and state governments. You find that there's delegated powers, which are powers specifically given to the national government. And there are reserved powers that are left to the states or the people. So we find that federalism balances national unity with state autonomy. Now let's talk about other aspects of our limited government. These include constitutional amendments, where change the Constitution requires a supermajority, making amendments very difficult. We have our Bill of Rights that protect individual freedoms from government abuse. And we have judicial review that was established in the Mayberry versus Madison case, where judicial review gives the Supreme Court authority to strike down unconstitutional laws. Now, what do we mean by representative government? There is a distinction between democracy and a republic. There's always been that debate, right? We know that democracy is government by the people through elections, and that the republic are when citizens elect representatives who make decisions on their behalf. When you look at the United States, it actually combines democratic participation with Republican representation. Now let's talk about our election cycles. What power do the people have? We know that the House members are elected every 2 years, that senators have 6-year terms, the president has a 4-year term with a maximum of 2 terms, and that Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Now, what about the nature of the presidency? That was something that was debated among the colonists. We found that the delegates during the convention debated whether this executive should be a one person or committee, and they were kind of debating how president should be selected. At the end, they ultimately created a single executive president and an electoral college system, where you'd find that each state select individuals known as electors who would then go and choose the president. So this is what I want to take away from our discussion about American history and the development of our democracy, is that American democracy developed from colonial self-government traditions. The revolution was driven by disputes over rights and representation. The Declaration of Independence established key democratic ideals. The Constitution created limited government through separation of powers and federalism. Compromises over representation and slavery shaped the new nation, and debates between the Federalists and the anti-federalists still influence politics today. So when you look at it, these historical foundations continue to shape modern American politics. Thank you.